Good morning and welcome to Qdabra's weekly webinar. Once again, this is Patrick. If you just joined, we're rerunning this webinar from last week. We had a couple people who wanted me to go slower last week, so I'm going to spend probably about 10 more minutes than I did last week to go through each of the techniques. We're also going to be getting this recording on YouTube. Last week, unfortunately, my machine that was recording did a Windows update during the recording, and I lost the recording. So it's another reason why we're doing it this week. And we've got an extra demo for you, of course. We want to make sure that everyone's happy here. So I've added number 11 here, how to auto ID your form using a SharePoint ID and a natural unique identifier. So these are the topics we're going to go over. I do have a quick poll for you before we get going. And this is just a very short answer. I want to know how many forms you have. So we'll do that for about 30 seconds here, 20 seconds. If you can quickly answer the question, that would be wonderful. I'll wait until we get about 75% of you before I close the poll. We're at 57, 62%, 67, 71, just a little more to go here. And there we go, 76%. It looks like 60% of you have more than 11 forms, and then there's 21% 2 to 5 and 26% in the 6 to 10 range. So thanks a lot for voting. We ended up with 86% of the vote there at the end. Okay, so where we're going today is we're going to be talking about various tips and tricks. I'm going to be doing a lot of little demos, and I'll start off with how to concatenate multiple values. Just to give people some context, we do a lot of forms, and last week I believe I gave people a quick news update on Microsoft. Microsoft announced Power Apps and a new technology called Flow about a month ago, beginning of May. And we were really excited because we thought finally there's a potential migration path for InfoPath, and so we just jumped on the bandwagon and we got jiggy with it, so to speak, and we spent hours and hours trying to make this thing work. And suffice it to say, we couldn't get it to work. In fact, it doesn't look like it's ready for prime time. In fact, Power Apps hasn't even been released yet officially for the demos that they did at the beginning of May. They're trying to get a release out. But even with the release, we have preview. Obviously, we're looking at the preview bits. Even with the release, we don't think Power Apps is a replacement for InfoPath yet, and Microsoft confirmed that. I'm meeting actually with Microsoft on Friday to dig into details on when they think they'll have something that's viable. But just wanted to let people know that InfoPath is still what we consider the best form technology out there. And I've done webinars in the past describing why I think it's the best form technology still, even though Microsoft has discontinued it. And they are supporting it. You're going to see my demos today with 365 running. Okay, so with no further ado, if you've got questions, please throw those in the question queue. I'll be looking at those throughout the webinar, but mostly at the end. Today we're doing a lot of little demos. We're going to take about 30-40 minutes of your time. If you're absolutely interested in number 11 and don't have time, please yell and scream in the question queue, and I might push that up a notch in terms of when I get to it. But let's talk about how to concatenate multiple values into a string first. And Catherine, thanks for that comment. We will be updating everyone on Power Apps and where it is, in terms of the reality soon. Okay, so I've got a lot of example forms here. I'm going to be switching to show you this very simple sample to begin with. For those of you who were here last week, this is going to be familiar to you. We've been managing InfoPathDev.com, which is our community forum, for over 10 years now, actually about 13 years. And we get asked the same questions over and over again, and we get tired of answering them and spending a lot of time on it. So we've put together some FAQs and some best practices. And so what I'm going to be doing here is I've got a repeating section, and I'm typing in some values into this repeating section. I'm not being super creative. But you can see here that we've got a field that we're concatenating those values with, and it doesn't matter how many strings we have, it does the right thing. We can also make sure that we remove the delimiter at the end so that we don't have that semicolon after Thursday. This is a very common request. The reason for this demo, and I'm going to show you how it works in a second, is if you have a repeating list of approvers that need to approve your form, you need to send them email. So you want to concatenate all their emails together on the to line or on the CC line. So this is a really important technique for that. How did we do it? Well, you can see here that we've just got some very simple default values. If we look at the this field here, actually I want to look at step 1. We're doing a double eval, and I'm going to actually launch my my Zoom app here so I can show you this up close. Just give me 1 second here while I do that. So, and run please. Okay, so we should be able to zoom in here. Now you can see here we've got a double eval. Now eval is a function in InfoPath that allows you to evaluate a node set. The first thing you pass to it is your node set, which in this case is row. The second thing you pass to it is a function that you want to run on that node set. And what we're essentially doing is we're going to concatenate every row in the repeating section, and this outer eval is actually the thing that makes it iterative. So this ... here is actually a command in XPath, the XML function language of InfoPath is called XPath, to basically reference the previous one. So this is essentially iterating through the entire repeating section, concatenating everything together. And that's how we get all of those repeating items onto one line. And you can look at these. I'm going to be sending out all of these samples for those of you who fill out the short 4-question survey at the end, and you'll be able to copy this technique into your form. Notice that the actual repeating section here is underneath row. It's my row, right? So that you want to use the XPath to the row. So if you're wondering how to get the XPath to your form, your field, just right-click on it and choose Copy XPath. And then if you launch Notepad, for example, and we show you what that looks like here, you'll see that, with any luck, I'll be able to drag this over. You'll see that the XPath for that repeating row is simply my fields, my rows, my row. So if we go back into the function here, step 1, you'll see that the XPath is actually my string. So it knows where it is based on this row here. So the inner XPath is not something that you're going to select using insert field. You're going to actually type that in, and it's going to be relative to this first path here, this row. So just keep that in mind, that inner XPath that you're adding there, that needs to be without an underline. So make sure that it doesn't have an underline, and you'll be okay. Okay, that's first technique. Now the next technique we're going to look at is, and once again, I've got some notes in here in the deck that you're going to get on how to do this, but you can also look at the samples. Now we have another technique for this, so let me just close this form out so I don't get too confused here. I'm going to show you the next technique, which is very similar, and this technique is going to show you how to copy repeating items into a multi-line control. So let's take a look at how this works. So here I've got a repeating section on top, hello wonderful world. I'm just going to add another item. I'm just going to say goodbye, wonderful world. And if I click on this button here, you can see that it is actually copying each of those repeating items into this multi-line control at the end, and more importantly, it's putting a line break in between them. So why is this important? Well, it's important when you want to promote repeating values to a SharePoint column, and you want to use a delimiter that's not a comma. You want to use a multi-line control. So you can actually promote this multi-line control to your SharePoint library, and then you can see all the values in your repeating text or repeating section in that column. Doesn't work for a lot of values. If you've got more than 10, I wouldn't recommend that, but this is a good technique. Now let's see how we did this. Now this one's a little bit trickier. So we've got the rules on the button, and you can see here that I'm setting the multi-line, and we're using that same technique that you just saw. We're using that eval technique to concatenate the fields. Now what we're doing differently though is we're actually inserting this line break, and that's what the CRLF means, carriage return line feed in the old parlance of yesteryear. So what we're doing here is we're concatenating all the rows, but we're inserting this extra thing, and then of course we have to reduce it using the substring, just like we saw in the previous example. We don't want the carriage return line feed at the very end, so we have that string length there at the end. Now let's see what's this carriage return line feed thing all about. Well, if you look at this form, I've got a field here that is setting the CRLF, the carriage return line feed, and this is setting it equal to the substring of the text. So what on earth is this? This is the secret sauce here to this technique. So I have a secondary data source where I've actually loaded this special, oops, that's too much. I've loaded this special text that has the carriage return and line feed in it. Let me show you what that text looks like. So what I did was I actually just created a XML, a secondary data source. I'm just going to try to drag this over here, and you can see here in my Notepad++ on the right that I've got this XML data source, and look at this lines 2 through 3 here. It's got ABC and then a return DEF. So what I've done is I've added this little CRLF XML thing to my form as a secondary data source, and then what I'm doing is I'm actually substringing, I'm actually getting that value, that one character, right? I'm saying I want the one character after character number 4, which is the carriage return. So this is the trick. It is a total hack, I admit, but it does work, and it is easy to do. So there's number 2. If you've got questions, let's see here. Brian's got a question. What would be the reason the last letter of goodbye was dropped from the copy? Well, it would be because I have a bug in my my rule. So if I take a look at this again here, let's fix it. You know, obviously we've got this substring string length -2. We probably just want -1 there. Let's try it with that. Good catch there, Brian. Glad to have you here this week. And let's see if, I'm just guessing here. I want to go through the other ones. So if this doesn't work, it's anyway. The reason is because the demo presenter here has got a bug in his form. Yeah, imagine that. The InfoPath expert has a bug in his form. Okay, so there it is working with the correct -1 there, and you're not a shill, but I appreciate the question. Thank you so much. Okay, so that's 1 and 2 with the bonus there. Now number 2 here, we're going to look at auto numbering, and to do this I'm actually going to jump ahead to a demo form that we'll also see with the pagination, which is technique number 4. So let me show you this form here in the preview. Let me show you what this looks like. So we have here a form that has a bunch of data, in this case alphabetical names of fruit, and we've got quite a few of these. So if I change the page size, you can see that I've got one for every letter of the alphabet. How many of you have had the jujube fruit, the jujube fruit? I have not, but that's my form, and you can see here that it's automatically numbering the item number. So how did we do that? Now this is a technique that's very useful because you want to automatically number these items, and it's very easy to do this. What you're going to do is you're going to use another one of those functions that we talked about earlier. In this case, InfoPath has a lot of functions in it. If we click on Insert Function and you select all, you'll see all of these wonderful functions, macros, whatever you want to call them, that InfoPath supports. And this is actually an incomplete list. This gives you the most frequent ones, but there's actually quite a few more that they don't list here. But count is one of the most frequent ones, and you can see it is right there. And what we've done is we've selected that, and then we've typed in this preceding sibling fruit. Now if I look at what this looks like under the covers, click on Edit XPath, you'll see that this preceding sibling command, let me just go into zoom in mode here. You can see that this command here is ... So we're actually going up one level. ... means go back to the previous node in the data source, and then we're getting the preceding sibling. So we're getting the previous version of my fruit. So my fruit is the repeating item. So we're getting the previous version of that, we're getting the count of it, and we're adding 1. And that automatically then numbers those rows. And so you can see here on the right in the data source, I've got fruit is the repeating item. So this is on item number, so I have to go back up, ... to fruit, and then I get this preceding sibling of fruit, which in this case, if it's 0, if it's the first item, it'll be 0. I add 1 to it, it's 1, and that's how I number my items. And that works all the way through. So that's the automatic technique for numbering. Very simple. We're actually using that technique to do our pagination. Pagination, before I get to pagination, let me show you one other form here. I'm just going to look at number 3, row formatting. Row formatting, you can see that we did that in 4 as well, but row formatting technique for making it easier for your users to parse long repeating sections. So if you have lots of items in a repeating group, you can use this formatting technique, and you can see it down below here, to provide some kind of a a context or what's the word I want to use, contrast between the rows, so people can kind of tell where they're at. And this is really easy to add to your forms. You just go into the repeating table and you add a rule, a conditional formatting rule, to highlight the rows if they're odd or if they're even. And to get that, you can use this command, position mod 2 equals 1. So this is some math. Obviously, position is the current row that you're on. This does not work in the browser. So what we have done for this other form, which does work in the browser, is we've done the same thing. We have a formatting rule here, but instead of using that position, what we're using is we're using the actual count that we just showed you how to create. So that item number is what we're using to get that count, and then we're using the math function mod to calculate whether or not the row is even or not. So when you take a number and you mod 2, it will always equal 1 if it's odd. So like 3 mod 2 is 1, 5 mod 2 is 1. It's just some math that you probably learned in high school and forgot. But anyway, that's how we get that repeatingness. And you could do it differently. If you want to highlight every third row, for example, you could just mod 3, and that would work. So that's how we do the alternate formatting. Now, there is a technique. This actually breaks in the case of the browser when you do some updates. So, and I've actually described that here. This is a technique that Hillary Stupa, she is our top developer. She described it a couple weeks ago in a blog post. I think it's a micro blog post. But anyway, basically what happens is when you right-click to change the borders and you set it to no color, the alternate formatting breaks, and you have to go into the manifest and modify it. And so there's some extra tips here for those of you who see the alternate formatting break. If you don't go into no color, if you don't change the shading and the borders, don't worry about it because it's not going to break. But if you do see that alternate color not showing up, then that's the reason. Stella, you've got a question. I'll come back to you in a second. Thanks for asking those questions up front. So the next technique is we're going to talk about pagination. When you've got large tables, you don't necessarily want to display them all within the view. Why is that? Well, it could be a slow. So if you have 100 or 200 items, you're displaying it all in the browser. It could be slow to display it all. It also could require scrolling, which is not a great user experience. So I recommend using pagination, and that's what we did with this sample here. Is we're paginating that list of 25 fruit, and we're doing it using conditional formatting. So let's just take a look at this example one more time. So you can see here that I'm paginating through my fruit here. Do I have a bug in the form? I have a bug in the form. So obviously I've broken the form. Somehow I broke it, but we can fix it. Obviously, this button here should be incrementing the page count, and you can see here that it is setting the page number. equal to the page number plus 1. So we're hopefully paginating through the items with that. And then we have a rule that hides the items based on what page number we're on. So if the item number is greater than the current page number, times the size of the page, then we hide it. And that's for if it's on a successive page, you know, one beyond where we're currently at. We also have this hide if we're on the previous. Now it may be that that I am, I've got this alternate color in here too. I'm going to move this up. I think the problem I have is that when I did this demo last week, the alternate color thing, I did not have that added. So I'm just going to delete that for a second here and see if that, there's some kind of a rule, you know, the rules are somehow interacting with one another, and it's not what I wanted. Okay, so here it is working. So there's obviously the contrast thing was the thing that threw it off, but you can see here that as I page through it, it's just showing me 5 items. Now I can change the page size to say 10, and I can still use this technique to page through. Of course, there's only 26 items. So what we're doing here is we're just using conditional formatting and these 2 extra fields, page size and page number, to control what we show in the form. The conditional formatting is just these 2 rules: hide if it's on the future page, hide if it's on the previous, and they have a condition. The previous, of course, is the page number minus 1 times the page size, and in the successive one or the future one is the page number times the page size is greater than. So it's very easy to add this rule, these 2 rules, to hide things, and it will speed up your form. It will also reduce the amount of scrolling that people have to do. So that's a very good technique. So that's number 4. Any questions on that? Let's see. Stella, is it possible to do a summary of all items in a row on the front page? Sure. You could just say there's 26 items. The way you would do that is you would add a count. You would say, you know, you'd add a calculated value here, and just using the same technique that we saw earlier, I can add a calculated value from the designer. So I can go down. It's not what I wanted. I apologize for my strange mouse behavior. If we look at calculated values here, it's basically what you're going to do, Stella, is you're going to add a calculated value, which is right here, and you're going to add a function to this to do the count. So once again, just like we did earlier, just click on count and then select the row that's repeating, which is in this case fruits. It's actually fruit, and this will then tell us what the total number of items is when we preview it underneath it, and we can bump this up in terms of the size of the text. And let's just preview this. So you can do the same technique to summarize it. I mean, any kind of aggregation can be done to show people kind of how many items they have. So you can see there that we're summarizing that to 20. So that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. Okay, I'm going to move on to technique number 5, which is cascading filters. So cascading filters comes up over and over again, and I've got a sample on 365 that I want to show you that has the cascading filters in it, and here it is. So this is I'm going to show you a bunch of different techniques with this form. This is our starter form, and right off the bat you can see that I've got dynamic tabs. I'm going to show you how to get the SharePoint ID in a second. And one of these tabs, I believe it is tab 4, is actually querying SharePoint to get data from a list, and then what we're doing is we're allowing people to select the data. For example, this is just some dummy data that we added, and notice that when I select this, there's nothing for some of these, but let's just see if I can actually select one that has some data in it, and that doesn't either. Okay, well, actually what I want to do is I want to just start this from scratch. I think that there's, because I had that session open for a long time, I think there might be some weird status in there. So let me just go try this one more time here with our demo form. And let me just show you the form to begin with. Here's the form in the designer. Now, one thing we'll talk about in a second is we're using one view for all of those different tabs, and each tab then has a separate section. Now, this is a benefit because you don't have to update every single view, and what we're doing is we're just controlling whether we display this section or not based on whether we're on that field or not. So if we look at these different sections here, let's just see if I can select the right one. You can see that, and I think I need to scroll down a little bit. You can see that there's a section around this entire number 2 or number 1. If the current tab is not equal to 1, it hides that section. And then down below we also have the same thing for the section 2 and 3 and so on. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but I just want to show you what I'm doing there. And then in the last section here, I've got the cascading filtering. So what we're doing here is we're loading these values from a list, and then depending on what the company is, we're actually filtering the contacts. And the way we do that is we have a filter on the drop-down. So we have a filter on this data that's saying, just give me those contacts where the customer ID is equal to the company. So this is a very common thing, and in this case we're just looking up the customer ID, we're saying it's equal to the company that we've selected in the previous one, and that's filtering it for us. So if I open this form up again in the browser, and while I'm showing you this, if you have questions, I'm just going to look at the question thing for a second. A lot of questions from Stella. Thanks, Stella, for asking all these questions. Yeah, so the tabs are just buttons. So if you look at those tabs in the designer, you can see that I've just created buttons. They look like tabs, but they're actually just buttons. When I click on the button, it sets the current tab equal to the button which the tab is, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then those sections down below will hide or show depending on that. So let's see if we can get this thing to work now. Now this form, as you can see, it took 3 or 4 seconds to load. We have actually QRules sandbox code in this form. It's running on 365. Everything got slower about September of last year. Microsoft made some changes to their 365 servers to re-architect the sandbox. And the impact was that the sandbox solutions, and it's still not working. We've got a bug in the form here where the contact is not coming in, and not sure. I need to fix that. But anyway, no demo would be complete if it weren't buggy in some regard, right? Okay, so let's go back to our. I'm going to try to get to that at the very end and see if I can debug that, but I don't want to waste time doing that now because I've got other things I want to show you, and the clock is ticking. Number 6, copying lookup data into your form. This is a very common technique because you have a lot of data, you want to copy it into your form. It's particularly frequently used with checklists or surveys. So your survey questions may change. You want to copy in the most current ones. How do you do that? So in the packet that you'll receive, we have a separate actual presentation that I did many, many moons ago. And this presentation is how to copy repeating data, and there's 2 techniques. And so you can look at this technique for details, but basically what we're doing, and I'll show you that there's a sample as well. So there's a supplementary presentation, and then there's a sample called copying repeating data. And this sample here has the 2 techniques built into it. One technique is out of the box, is slightly complicated, but it does work. And the other technique requires QRules, which is our plugin for InfoPath. So, and this describes both techniques. And basically, you can imagine for a second here that this form is a form that has a connection to a secondary data source like a list or a database. And we're going to be pulling in some data on load or based on a query. And then we want to copy that data, so you can see there's 3 rows here with the secondary data in it, and we've just added some dummy data here. We want to copy the data into the main data source. So why would this be useful? Well, if you've got a questionnaire, or let's say you have an employee review. Well, the employee review you want to ask them different questions based on their competency, right? Their core competency. If they're a developer, if they're a tester, they're going to have different questions. So you want to basically select their competency, query the database or the list, copy the values into your main data source, have them answer those questions, send it to the manager provides feedback, and so on. So those questions are going to be different based on the competency. The same is true if you're doing a survey or if you're in the field, like you're looking at some kind of a machine in the field. Maybe you're doing an inspection on a machine, but the machine is different based on where you're at. You'd want to copy in the questions that are specific to that machine. So we've got two techniques. The first technique, you can see it just copied the rows in. It does require that we have default values. The second technique does not. So the second technique, using QRules, inserts the rows and then copies the values. And this is detailed in much more depth in the sample. We can read everything describing how it's done. But basically what we're doing here is, let me just show you the rules quickly for that second technique. So you have rules in your form that, of course, you're going to query the database. You're going to get the questions that you need. You're going to filter the database query so that you're using getting back exactly what you want. And then what you're going to do is you're going to add a rule that inserts the rows into the target table. If you're using QRules, this is easy. You just add a command to insert exactly the number of rows that you want. And here you can see, this is kind of hard to see. You can see that the count of the items is inserted. So we insert exactly those 3 rows in the sample case. And then when we insert those 3 rows, we actually have a rule that fires. So when a row is inserted into this master source table, we have a rule that says, hey, if we're in the second approach, then we're going to basically set all the values. And then the last action we have is to increase the count. That's the iteration. And then it will copy the values correctly for the next row. So that's how you do copy repeating data. Once again, I'm going a little bit fast here because I think that you've got a lot of content. You can use the extra presentation, the sample form. You can take a look at how this works. And if you have questions, let me know. Okay, so let's look at the hide show sections. Now, this is another technique that comes up quite often. We have let's say you have a drop-down, and actually this is the technique I was showing you earlier. I'm confusing myself. If in the InfoPath starter form we have different sections here, and I was just describing this earlier when I showed you this form. The different sections here, can I do this correctly? The different sections here hide or show depending on what that current tab is. Look on the right, you'll see the condition, current tab not equal to 2, hide the control. So that section will only show up if I click on those tab number 2. So as Stella was correctly guessing earlier, if I go up to these tabs, these are just buttons. And the buttons also have a rule. They highlight the button if it's selected. So if the current tab is equal to 2, make this button, which is tab 2, orange. And that's what's showing that context. It's very easy to add these. And then, of course, we have the rule to set the current tab. If they click on the button, we want something to happen. So we change the current tab equal to 2. So that's how simple it is. And we like this technique because it is very simple. Of course, you can change the text on the button by right-clicking the button properties, and you could change it to be specific to the section that you want. Once again, the benefit to you is, number 1, you don't have to update every view when something changes. Number 2, it provides less work because you only have to create one view with one set of conditional tabs in it. So I recommend this technique. If you've got super long form, 20 pages or so, you may not want to use this because the view rendering in the browser may time out if you're trying to publish it and you have a really super long view. Typically we don't see that for forms that are 10 pages or less. This form is only a couple pages. But if you've got a really long form with lots and lots of sections, a couple hundred fields, then you're going to still have to go back to using separate views. But in most cases, I'd say 95% of the cases, it works just fine. That is technique number 7. Once again, questions, please throw them in. Now we've got another part of this demo here. If I go back to my my browser demo and click on tab 1, I've got a lookup here. I'm running a lookup based on 3 characters. So I'm actually querying our list and pulling back everyone that matches contact name MAR. Now this is a good technique because sometimes you've got too much data and you don't want to query it all. You want to query a subset. So we're going to use a filter to do that. And how do we do that? So let's take a look at the form and see how we did that. So this is section 1. So if I go up to the top here, you can see that I've got this section 1 here. And this field, actually, the search string, has some special properties on it. So when this, and if you look at the display tab here, you'll see that if the text box is 3 characters, it will automatically tab to the next control, which will fire the rule, which will query the source. In this case, we're getting all the matching companies, and the data connection is contact search. So what this is doing then is it's actually setting the search string value in the secondary data source for that. You have to have a 3-character search string column for the list of items. That's the one catch here. Because we can't do a partial string match with the default filters, we have to actually add a search string. But this is easy to do. You can run a calculated value, and you can automatically create these by creating a column, making it calculated, making it a substring of the other column, and then it will automatically fill in with all the values. And then what we're doing is we're setting this. We're saying, give me all of those rows in that secondary list that have MAR as the search string, as the first part. So it's only going to work for the first part of the string, and then it queries it. So it's limiting the number of items it returns, and then it's querying it. That's the technique, and that's a very, very good technique, because if you have a lot of data, especially a database with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of rows, you definitely want to reduce your set before you pull it into your form, or else you're going to have terrible performance. Okay, so that's number 8. We're almost done here. This form also shows you how to centralize rules. If you look at the form in the designer, we have a bunch of buttons at the top, and we've got a save button, we've got a submit button. What's the save button doing? The save button is setting the submit field equal to save. The submit button is setting the submit field equal to submit. Well, gee, how is that possibly doing anything? Well, let's take a look. So if we look at the rules are all in the secondary data source here. So if we change our data source to form logic, you'll see that we have this action here, and underneath action we have this node called submit. And this is where all the rules happen. The benefit of actually having all the rules here is, number 1, if you've got a lot of buttons and you need to update the rules, you don't need to update the buttons. You just go into this one location where it's all centralized, and you update the rules here. Now, to get this technique to work, there is one thing you need to do, and that is you need to make sure you stop if 0. So you need to have a way to stop the rules from firing, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting some of those values in the secondary data source, and we want to make sure that we don't rerun the submit or the save based on that. So here, if the submit equals 0, we just stop everything from happening. We what do you call it? Short circuit the rules, and that it's really important that you check this don't run remaining rules. So that's the short circuiter. That makes sure that we don't infinitely loop. And then we have our commands that we're running. In this case, this form has a lot of interesting things it's doing. It's getting it's running some rules to calculate the date time, and it's getting errors, so we actually get whether or not people have filled out the form. We get some error counts, and if there's errors in the form, we clear the errors and save it if it's saved. Otherwise, we submit it to SharePoint. And there's a bunch of other commands in here, but the point is that both submit and save are using the same centralized logic, and that reduces the effort on your part to maintain it. Now let me show you one more technique here, and actually I think I'm almost done, but there's 2 more techniques. That's centralizing rules. Drop-downs with other text. I have a sample here in the kit that you're going to get that has this little sample. A lot of times you want to have a drop-down, but you also want to have some other. So you might have, a whole bunch of values that you want them to select, but every once in a while they may have something that's not in the list. So we can say Oregon, or not Oregon, California, or whatever. And this allows you to do that. So this is kind of nice because it does give you the ability to type in a different value. And how do we do that? Well, it's pretty easy to do this. What you want to do is have two sections. So you have a section with a drop-down that's bound to your state or whatever your field is, and then you have another section that instead of using a drop-down, you use a text box. And then you just control which section you display based on some other field. In this case, we have an attribute. Sorry, I didn't mean to click on that. We have an attribute underneath state that says other. And so if you look at the rules here, you'll see that we're hiding the drop-down section if other is equal to true, and we're hiding the type-in section if other is equal to false. So you just have that toggle. You use some field in your form to toggle between the two sections, and then of course you have to have a button or a value like other to switch back and forth. So it's pretty easy to do that. You can see here that if I select this, I've got a rule. If the state is equal to other, I set that other thing equal to true, and that's what toggles the separate section to display. This requires true. If it's a true-false field, you need to use these true and false formulas, which is a bit of a trick as well. But you've got the sample here. You can look at that. Now, in addition, we have a time difference. We're calculating the difference between two times. I think I did this for one of the participants last week. I think it might have been you, Stella. So if we have some time here, like 1400, and the end time is, say, 16:30:45, you can see that it's calculating the number of minutes in between those two times, 165 minutes. And if you're interested in looking at that, you can take a look at well, let's take a look at it right now here. So we could take the time diff. Actually, we have the rule on the end time. So we're just calculating the difference using a substring command. This is a bit of a tricky command here, but you can see that basically I need to convert the date or the time or both into a number, and then I need to subtract one from the other. So the way I convert that into a number is I'm using this translate command along with the substring command to strip out the formatting. So typically a time is going to be 16:00:00, right, with the seconds at the end. So I just strip out all the colons. That's what that colon is. The translate dot with the colon there is just stripping out all the formatting colons. It's giving me a number, in this case 16:45:00, and then I subtract the other number, which is 14:00:00, and I get the result, which is the number of minutes in this case. So that's how you calculate time. Now we have a command in QRules to do this and exclude weekends, holidays, that kind of thing. So there's some other advanced techniques there as well. So last but not least, I want to show you that SharePoint ID thing. I don't know why I'm saving it. So the last technique is a bonus technique for today, and this is going to show you how to automatically ID your form. So I actually have this on, I think it's tab 4, maybe it's tab 5. Tab 3? Okay, so if I save the form, it's going to submit it to SharePoint, and it's going to create a unique value for the form. And what you want to do is you have to actually create a unique key to use this technique. So there's a lot of, there's a wonderful person in Wellington, New Zealand, SYM Wanaton, who has published a whole bunch of cookbooks on InfoPath, and she recommends using the max ID to calculate the ID for the form. That will not work because if people submit simultaneously, they'll both get the same max ID. So if you have a lot of people submitting to the same library, that technique doesn't work, but this technique does. What we're doing here is we're getting a unique value, and then what we're doing is we're querying the list. We're submitting the form with the unique value. We query back the library with that unique value to get the ID, and then we set it in the form. So it's basically a double submit. Now, if we look at the library, you'll see that this item I just submitted has the date, time, and the seconds here. So it's date, time, 2016, 06, 02, 8:48, 32 seconds after the minute, and then I just prefix, or I just suffix my name at the end, my username, and I submit that, and then I query the list. Let's take a look at the form. It's probably easier to look at the form and see how we do this. Because we have to do a bunch of things here to make this unique. And you can see that I've got this section down here for tab 3, section 3, and the ID here is where I have my rules, get ID. So I'm submitting the form to make sure it shows up in the library. I query the library again, but in this case I'm filtering it, just like we filtered with MAR earlier. I'm filtering the library with the form name so that it only returns the one that I'm on, so the one that I submitted. And then I set the ID based on the return of that. So I have a rule that sets the SharePoint ID in the form equal to the ID from the secondary data source. If I double click on this guy here, you'll see it's actually that secondary data source that I'm querying. Now, one key thing to think about here is when you're creating this data source, data connection, make sure that you, and I made this mistake earlier this morning, make sure that you actually don't check, let me just show you where it is, don't check include data for the active form only, because it'll fail. You want to make sure that's unchecked. Okay, but then it'll work just fine. It'll return exactly one item because there's only one that matches that key, and that'll give you your ID. Hey, that's pretty much it for my demos. I had one failure out of 11, the filtering, and I've got some questions. Okay, so I'm just going to go from the top down here, and thank you for being here, by the way. We've got the quick survey at the end. Don't forget to fill that out. And a lot of little common techniques today. So it looks like, Melissa, you've got a question. Can you concatenate values selected from a drop-down list using the same technique? Yeah, absolutely. As long as the drop-down is in a repeating section or repeating table, you can totally do that because it's just going to be the same field. The drop-down is just the control. The control is going to be bound to a field in your data source. Use that field to do the concatenation. Brian, you busted me earlier on that bug I had, and I fixed that, so that's good. And then Stella, you've got a question on the auto date, and auto date is a pretty common technique. There are a couple functions that you're going to want to use for that. In this case, when we set the when we save the form, we have some logic here in this form that automatically sets the date. So we have this pre-submit. We have a bunch of rules we run on pre-submit, including setting the date submitted. So in this sample form that you're going to get, you'll see that we have a rule that automatically sets date submitted equal to now, and that's auto. So that gives you the current time and the date, in that case, date and time. So hopefully that answered your question, Stella. Marlon, it's great to see you here. Welcome to our webinar, and I hope everything's going well down there in Trinidad and Tobago. How did you do the tabs to get the colors to change? Right, so I did cover this at the end, or well, later, and you probably already know what I'm talking about now, but you just set a rule, a formatting rule on those buttons. Can I use my mouse? I'm just going to scroll up here and show you this again, if I can. And so the buttons then have, if it's the current tab, it makes it orange. So it's very easy to add those. Molly, great to see you here. How do you get tabs in the info path and add different forms to it? Well, you're just going to add buttons. So you're just going to add buttons, and there's going to be a little bit of space between your buttons, or none as the case may be. In this form here, there's no space in between the buttons. I just added the buttons one next to another. Okay, so it's really that simple. Now, what I would recommend doing for a new form is creating a starter form, and that's why we created this info path starter. So you can reuse it over and over again. And you basically just have the header, you have the footer, you've got some help text in the form, you've got some common things that you're going to include in all your forms, like a debug section, and then you basically just copy this form over and over again, and then you customize it for the form du jour, the form of the day, right? So I recommend using a starter form to make it easier to recreate forms over and over again with the same techniques. And okay, so then we're almost done here. Stella has got a couple more questions. Can you do filtering based on info in the form another list? Yes, I did show that technique, hopefully. That's technique number 7, I believe. And if you got true, so Stella's clarifying her question. What I mean is if you have 2 drop-downs and what you choose in the first drop-down filter the second row. Yes, that was the thing that broke, but that worked last week. So I'm going to fix that in the form before I send out the package, make sure that's working. Let's see, so Marlon's got a question, can you change the button text with a rule? Yes, you can, but you have to make sure that the button is based on a field. So in your button properties, what you want to do is you want to go in to see where it says label, change the label to be a field in your form. So the button text has to point to a field. And then what you can do is you can change the field and the button will change. So that's how you make your button label text dynamic. And let's see, Greg, thanks for being here. Is there any way to have a button with a label of 2 lines? Well, you could, like you said, you could use the same technique to have the label point to a field in your form, and then that field could have that CRLF that you saw earlier in tip and technique number 1 to add a carriage return into the button. So you could do it that way. It's kind of tricky, but that's a great question. But you can do it. You can just make sure that your button label is set to a field in your form, and that field is set using that CRLF technique from the first tip I showed. Stacy's got a question, will it work with an external list? I'm not sure what you're asking, Stacy. I need some more context. But in general, the filtering techniques will work with an external list because the external list is hosted in SharePoint, and you should be able to set the filters. You can't do partial filters. You have to do exact match. If you're using a database, you can do partial filters. We have a web service that allows you to do partial filters as well. Dick, you've got a question. How do you count time differences when the times have come from PCs in different time zones? Well, you have to get the time zone in the form, and QRules has a command to get the time zone, to get the current time zone. So you could use QRules to basically set the current time zone in your form, and then you could use that to calculate the time difference. And you could actually have a command, convert time zone. So you could convert the time zone and convert the time, and then use that to calculate it. But you can't do it out of the box. You have to write code, and that's why we added that to QRules. And then last but not least, let's see, Molly, you've got a question again. Is there a way to get access to search string function you showed? Is the data for the company details coming from SQL? No, it's coming from a SharePoint list, and you'll get all the samples I show, so you can actually look at this sample. Make sure you right-click and choose Design when you get the XSNs, and then you can look at it. They're on our 365 site. You're not going to have access to that, but you'll need to change the data connection to point to your list. Here, if I look at our data connections, I'm guessing it's customer data, maybe not. But so here's a customer data, and there's the search string there, MAR, right? And that's just like I said. You don't have to actually manually enter this. You can use a calculated substring, and we're just querying it based on that search string. So you're going to create a column with a prefix. I recommend 3 characters, and then you set up your form to automatically tab to the next field if it's 3 characters, a limit. And then there's a rule that runs that sets the field and then queries it. So that's the key technique there, and that's totally done using SharePoint lists or using SQL. SQL can be done. Obviously, you need to set up a web service like we have for SQL, and if you're using our web service, I think you're scheduled to install it, then that'll be a piece of cake. And thanks, Marlon, for the kind words. And anyway, yes, so Stacey, back to your question, yes, it should work on an external list, because as long as that external list has that 3-character column in it, you should be fine. You may need to create that column to get it to work, but you should be fine. Anyway, I just want to remind you that we try to do these things every week, and we really appreciate you being here. If you have any questions or comments for me, feel free to email webinars@qdabra.com. And like I said, there's a quick survey at the end. I appreciate your feedback. We have that package of goodies coming out to you, and I hope to see you here next week. Have a great day. Thanks.